Hello, dromedaries and drama llamas. Imagine Dragons put out a single a few days ago, which is not the sort of thing I usually talk about, but it is a single that's attached to the soundtrack of the Arcane animated series that's coming to Netflix pretty soon, and animated series are the sort of thing I usually talk about on this channel. And even more so is animated series that are animated by studio houses like Fortiche, which have an immaculate track record when it comes to creating great, like truly great 3D character animation. Fortiche is one of those studios that has just consistently impressed me with everything I've ever seen them put out. And now they get to do an entire animated series, and as a bonus cherry on top, they also get to do a music video for Imagine Dragons. They are responsible for the animation in this thing, which contains a crap ton of teasers for the Arcane animated series and like sort of the emotional arc of one of the characters in the show. This is Powder, sitting right here. She'll later be known as Jinx, which is how you might have heard of her. But yeah, it's very good. It's very good directing, some really good character acting, and I'm quite excited to take a look at it. And I believe it is now safe to do so. It wasn't safe when the music video was first released. When, like, if you tried to do anything with it back then, you just got a copyright block, like, immediately on everything. Whether the visuals or the music, it was very locked down. But now I think, even though the music is still obviously very copyrighted, can't mess with that, the animation, the visuals of the music video are now, I think, fair game for content creators to use. At least I hope so, because I'm taking a shot at it right now, and if it doesn't work, well, I might get a big nasty copyright hole blown right in the side of my channel, so that would suck, but this music video is worth the risk because it's very good. So, let's take a look and start at the beginning. And we begin with just a few credits. There's a little bit of a thing, which is these symbols that flash up on screen here, right? They're stylized to sort of look like paint or graffiti or something along those lines. That's very much Jinx's hallmark, is that she leaves graffiti everywhere and it looks kind of like that. So it's like, yeah, okay, they're doing a little bit of that in the intro, I suppose. More importantly, welcome to the last drop. And location, that's going to be very important in the Arcane animated series as far as we can tell. It is the place where our two of our primary characters, Jinx and Vi, or Powder and Vi, grow up, and it's where their putative father figure Vander holds court, I believe, who is the guy who sort of teaches them to get along and like try how to protect themselves in the miserable undercity of Son. Because if you look around the aesthetic of this place, it's like, would you want to live here? I'm not sure I would, because it's a place that's full of poison chemicals all the time, and criminal gangs, and mobsters, and violence, and the police just mostly exist to kick your ass and not really help you or protect you. It's just like, it's not a great place to be, and that's very much the subject of the TV show, is gonna be this class conflict between the lower reaches of Zon and the shining utopian techno city Piltover that's built very much on top of Zon. That's sort of the thematic area that we're in. And the establishing shot we're getting here is doing a lot of heavy lift. Like, if you've never seen anything about Arcane before, you take a look at a frame like this and you go, okay, yeah, I get it. It's industrial, it's run down, there's lots of rust, there's lots of like sort of pipes sort of bending at odd angles that sort of seem half cobbled together like a shanty town. You can kind of tell just from the aesthetics and the framing of this right here, that is like, okay, this is not the place where all the fancy, rich, wealthy people live. This is a sort of downbeaten, industrial place where like things are built very tall and everything is sort of bespoke because nothing's really built standard. Everyone just kind of has to couple together their own lives. Like just in terms of like a tone setter for the mood of the place, this is a very good shot. Anyway, annoying text pops up on screen, and here again we get a few of the trademarks of Jinx once again, that sort of paint, scribbly aesthetic, especially this stuff right here. The letters that are sort of scribbled and scratched, that is a hallmark of the internal monologue of Powder as she becomes more and more traumatized over the course of the show. She's not going to have a good time in Arcane, just want to point that out from the start. She's going to have a very bad time, in fact. And when her thoughts get particularly loud and unpleasant, well, they tend to be rendered in exactly this kind of scratchy, bright light writing that sort of flashes up on screen. Anyway, whoa, here she comes, and she is sad about something. And you kind of get that, like, from the very first frame that you see her. It's like, if you had to gauge her mood just based on, like, her posture and behavior right here, again, mark of good character acting is, like, you know exactly how this character's feeling right now, right? Like, she's young, she's a kid, she's clearly like she's down about something, but it's not like she's not sulking as such. You can kind of see like the brows are knit, and it's like she's thinking about something that's troubling her, right? She's not sulking because she's mad about something. She's thinking like she's troubled by something is what she looks like. And there's some great character design going on with Powder right here. First of all, look at the shirt. And I really love this detail because the shirt, like you see like this awkward thing where like part of it is longer than another part of it, which is like, yeah, that might be fashion, but the way it's put together, like the straps and like the awkward folds, it looks like it sort of squeezes a little bit too tight in some places. It looks a little bit cheap, right? Like it looks a little bit like it was sort of just cobbled together from whatever was lying around. And that's, again, something you can also see, like, just in her haircut. Powder's haircut is absolutely brilliant piece of character design, because you can tell, like, there ain't no hairdresser been near this ever. This is someone who either cuts their own hair or has their hair cut for them by someone who has absolutely no idea what they're doing. And so you get a sense of her situation, and you get even more of a sense of her situation when you look at, for example, the dilapidated circumstances of like the wallpaper crackling off the walls, like the rust, the fact that there isn't a single straight line in this entire image, which is something I love, something I adore when animation studios take the time to do this, because in reality, in real life, even like, unless you are in the most sort of plastic and glass, futuristic tech utopia place you've ever seen in your life, you're almost never going to find any perfectly straight lines anywhere in nature. Like, if you actually look close at something, unless it's, like, made of plastic, it's not a 100% straight. There's little bumps, there's little ridges, there's little, like, the little imperfections that exist everywhere, which here are being exaggerated and stylized, which is just the sort of thing, like, when it comes to background design for me, that's the sort of thing that gives a location life. It's not that, like, everything is geometrically perfect and put together correctly and you got, like, depth and sense of scale. No, it's the texture. It's like the fact that, like, you can see that this little piece of wood that's nailed to the wall over here, like it's curved, it's not straight, and it has these imperfections and like things that are torn off and splinters. Like, oh, that's all good stuff. I get excited about it. I don't know if anyone else does. Anyway, the next thing that happens is it's a classic camera move. We go from looking at Powder as she's walking out of the doorway. I'll call her Jinx. That's probably easier for everyone. We look at Jinx as she's walking out of this doorway, and then the camera perspective. Notice that the camera here is completely steady. Like, as she walks back and forth, nothing moves. Like, nothing moves. This camera is sitting on a tripod. Well, I'm saying camera. It's a 3D camera that exists inside a computer simulation, but imagine if it was a real camera. This thing is sitting on a tripod. It's not going anywhere. Nothing is moving it. There's no bumps, no anything happening. Then we swap. As she moves forward, we do a 180-degree flip, and now we're inside her perspective, seeing things quite literally from, like, right over her shoulder. And take a look at... Someone's sending me... Oh, God. I'm getting DMs on Twitter. I don't want to look at them right now. And take a look at what the camera does. Now, all of a sudden, the camera is handheld. You can see that it sort of wobbles from side to side. You can see how the perspective kind of changes. And what that gives us is it puts us completely inside of Jinx's perspective. Like, completely. Because the camera is moving almost as though she's holding it behind her own shoulder, right? It gives you this sense of actually moving through the space. And that's part of the point of what's happening here, is that we're seeing this place and what it's like from her perspective. Which again is sort of, it's visual language that's telling us to empathize with this character, that's telling us that, hey, this is someone whose mind you should try and occupy, whose perspective you should try to think from. It tells us that she is a main character of the thing. Secondary characters is this group of very horny D&D bards that have wandered in and are just sitting around a table shooting the shit. Also known as Imagine Dragons. And here, again, this is a small thing, but... you would think, for example, that when it comes to putting a real person into 3D animation, that should be simple, right? You just copy the shape of the face and then you put it into the animation and then boom, you have a perfect rendition of the person. Wrong. Very wrong. Extremely wrong. Don't ever do that. What you get if you try to do that is a horrible trip to the uncanny valley from whence there is no return alive or sane. It's not good. You don't want to just like copy an actual real human person's proportions and face into an animated show like this, or indeed ever, you want to do some post-processing work on that. Specifically, you want to do some stylization, which is what's being done here. These are very good renditions of what the members of Imagine Dragons and JID actually look like, but they are stylized. There's changes that have been made. There's little exaggerations, little things, little bumps and lumps that have been added and put in good places to caricature them just a little bit to make them fit into the stylized universe of Arcane. And here is perhaps a place where it's worth talking about some of the background design here, because what we have here is indeed, like, what we have here, as you can see as the camera moves through it, we have a genuine 3D scene, right? We have, like, oh, the tables here, and it's like, all this stuff is all, like, a lot of this stuff is 3D modeled. Like, they actually modeled this space in 3D software and rendered it and put textures on and put lighting on and so on and so forth. But a lot of it also is just flat textures that are put on the background. So, for example, this background behind the band right here, these things that are hanging on the walls, that is almost certainly not actually 3D modeled at all. That's just a flat texture that's applied to the wall with a lot of lighting baked into it to give it a sense of depth, but you don't have to spend 10 billion years actually fully 3D modeling every little single goddamn thing that's hanging on the walls. You can just, here's a flat drawing, we've painted it correctly so that it aligns with the light source for the scenes that we needed, and problem solved there. Anyway, fidgeting. Fidgeting is good. I like fidgeting. Fidgets are a great way to characterize people. It's a great way to sort of characterize characters in your series. When a character is just sitting there, doing nothing, talking, like playing idly with their hands, what do they do with their bodies when they are otherwise engaged? What do they do with just hang out? And what we get from the lead singer, and I don't know the names of any of the Imagine Dragons band members, sorry, they're not my favorite band in the world. I don't think they're bad or anything. It's just not the kind of music I listen to usually. Radioactive was good. I liked that back in the day. So the lead singer here, you can see he's sitting generally very still. He has this slightly tense posture where, like, he's leaning forward, he's like resting his weight on his thigh with one arm, and he's leaning forward on his elbow, and most of his body is fairly immobile. Like, most of it isn't really doing anything. His head is sort of like moving back and forth in reaction to people sort of talking to him and saying things. The main thing he's doing is he's fiddling with this little thing, whatever the hell that is. A vape pen or lighter? I don't know. This little thing. He's just fiddling with that one. He's just like playing around with it, messing with it, tapping it on the table. By contrast, over here we have the guitarist, who is like all guitarists, and I can say this because I play the guitar, he just can't fucking stop playing the goddamn thing when people are trying to talk to him. It's like, don't let guitarists near guitars in social situations. They can't help themselves. He's, of course, sitting there, tuning it up, fiddling with it. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna play something. I'm gonna play Wonderwall or whatever. Like, he's gonna do a thing because he's a goddamn guitarist and they can't help themselves. And he's talking to the drummer specifically. Who, as he's tuning up his guitar, he's also like, yeah, because he's a drummer, yeah, I'll drum on something to accompany you, why not? But they're just messing around, they're shooting the shit, right? They're just talking to each other. Then we have I don't know what this guy does, he's the bass player, I guess? Keyboardist? Who knows? It doesn't matter. He's, like, much more rested in these. He's messing with this little cup, right? And that's the thing, is, like, we can't tell exactly what the personality of each person here is just based on their little fidgets, but we can tell that they are different. We can tell that they use their physicality and their bodies and their motions and their movements differently from one another. And so they are characterized. So they are made different in compelling and interesting ways, where if you get to spend more time with the character, you can figure out what their actual personality is. But just the fact that, like, this guy's messing with his mug, he's got, like, both hands, but he's mostly sitting very still compared to, like, the lots of body movement that's going on with the drummer and the guitarist. And we have JID sitting back here, who's sort of, like, just kind of leaning back and taking it all in, like, touching his chin sort of thoughtfully, and, like, thinking, hey, he's almost, like, looking at the lead singer, like, hey, get a load of these two idiots. Like, it's kind of, you get a little bit of that social vibe between them. It's all, like, it's good character animation is what I'm trying to say. Like, they're all different, they all display different personalities, they all display, like, a sense of having an interplay with each other. Like, they all have reactions and dynamics with one another. And it comes across in, like, this is, like, what, 2 to 3 seconds of animation? Yeah, something like that. 3 seconds of animation, and boom, you have a sense that, oh, these people are characters. They're not just static background extras, they're characters. Like, there's something to them. which is the same thing that you get with these guys right here. Now, you could very easily, you could just have gotten away with, we have a background character over here who are completely out of focus, like this, you don't have to move them, you don't have to do, they can just be there and like maybe have a breathing cycle or whatever, and it'd be fine. But no, look at what's actually going on. As Jinx is sitting down to do her thing over here, you see that there's some kind of exchange happening between these two characters, right? Well, like, someone says something, and then, like, you can see they kind of move away from each other, and it's like they finished up a conversation or something, or, like, someone said something, and, like, leaning back to await a reaction. Like, something's happening. Like, we don't know what it is. Again, there's not enough information to really form a conclusion, but, something is going on. There's a life in this scene outside of just the main character. And that's also just an issue of budget. Like, in a lot of 3D animation, especially 3D animation that's created for, like, trailers or for the web or whatever, there oftentimes isn't really the budget to do much more than the absolute necessary animation. Like, you'll get main character animation and animation on whatever secondary characters are in shot who need to be doing something, and then let's just paint them into the background. Doesn't really matter. Just leave them static. We're not going to bother to do complex animation of every single character in the shot because we don't have the budget for that. This thing needs to be done in like 2 months and it needs to be out the door. So here also, like, the fact that you have this stuff going on to me is also just a thing that says, hey, there was some budget here. Like, there was some extra time available. There was some extra resources available to do something as, like, fundamentally useless as that. Like, it doesn't do anything for the music video as a whole. It doesn't drive the story forward. It just, in the brief moment that these two characters are on screen right here, they just add a little bit of a sense of the bar being alive around her, of something going on outside of what the main character's feeling, and it just adds vibes, man. It's just good vibes. Anyway, let us talk about what Jinx is actually doing here. And I really love the framing of this shot also because, like, look how tiny she is. Like, you get the sense, like, she's this tiny little girl in this world that's a lot too big for her, right? Like, she's a little girl in a place that's very clearly designed for adults, and she feels out of place. Like, she feels alone and lonely, and she's, like, worried about what she's gonna do, so she has to, like, climb up onto a chair. And even when she's up onto the chair, you can see she's still too small for this space. Like, so it reinforces that sense of, like, her being kind of lonely and isolated from the other, from everyone else, like being alone with her thoughts, which is what's going on. So, the wind-up monkey. This is a symbol that Jinx has had since her earliest introduction, like way the hell back in, good lord, when was she put in? 2013, I think Jinx was released into the League of Legends video game, where her initial launch trailer was a music video also, just symmetry there, where she's playing a sort of very happy, I'm gonna blow everything up and kill everyone, song about blowing stuff up and killing people. And one of the motifs of that music video was this wind-up toy monkey with an insane look on its face that she winds up and then sort of bangs his little cymbals and wanders along, and it's sort of a visual signifier of how crazy she is. Like, this girl is nuts. She's the female like, it's sort of female Joker kind of thing. It was not that deep back then, but they've brought that symbology back for Arcane, and my sense of it is that this is much more going to be a metaphor for the character, in the sense that this monkey gets wound up and wound up and wound up and wound up, and then they set it loose, and then it just kind of goes off. And that's kind of seems to be what Jinx's character arc is through Arcane, is that she's going to get wound up and wound up and wound up and wound up, and things are going to get worse and worse and worse and worse for her, until finally she's all wound up, and she gets let loose, and people around her will not like what happens when she gets let loose. That certainly seems to be sort of what they're driving at. Anyway, there's some trickery going on with the text in the background here, which is accompanied by these lovely visual effects where, like, all of a sudden Jinx is essentially sitting on, like, paper cutouts, and the font changes multiple times. And some of this stuff is just references. Like, for example, this is the font of the Riot Games company logo that they just sort of recycle. Yeah, it's a reference to Riot Games. Doesn't really mean much more than that. Then it sort of cycles through Russian for some. Well, not, I don't know if it's Russian, actually. I know it's Cyrillic. It's a Cyrillic script, but I don't know what it says. And someone who actually reads Cyrillic might be able to tell me. And then we cycle through this sort of glitch animation. Then we get a little flash of Fortiche, which is the studio responsible for the thing. Then we flash into a sort of street art aesthetic. We flash from that into more of a Jinx aesthetic. This is sort of almost like a scream effect in an old comic book. Flash from that into this sort of 80s, 90s looking text, whatever the hell this is. Another street arty sort of aesthetic. Flashing through some kanji, I think? Or is that katakana out there on the left? Or is that even, that might even be Japanese, it might be Chinese or Korean script for all I know. I don't actually know that much about those. Back into another sort of street art aesthetic. Fortiche gets in a little flash. We get this, which is just the original font, but in yellow. And then we cut as she watches the little monkey with the crazy red eyes. Again, Jinx will have an eye color change at some point during the show, and it's going to be a pivotal moment for the character. So flashing red eyes seems like, again, like a bit of a prediction to me. And this little monkey is a tricky little thing because if you pay attention, it sort of doesn't really move like a toy, does it? Like the toys that I know that are sort of wind-up toys, they have very, very simple basic movement, right? Like they just kind of go tick, 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 tick. Like the very sort of mechanical, very, very stiff in their motion. This monkey, however, is not stiff in its motion whatsoever. Oh, it's like it doesn't bend. Like the limbs on it don't visibly bend. I think they do bend a little. Yeah, they do actually. Haha. They do bend a little bit just for the convenience of the animation. But take a look at the way that this thing is animated, right? So the body and the head are essentially separate masses that are moving around, attached by the tether of this little neck bone. So you can see how, as the body moves over to the right, you can see how it kind of gets there first, and then it kind of drags the head along with it, so that it kind of sways over to the side. And then the body goes back, and you can see, again, the body is moving ahead of the head and sort of dragging it behind it, giving it this sense of, like, almost a zombie walk, right? Like where the head is just sort of lolling about and being pulled around. And add to that the fact that the jaw is attached to the head itself by a similar mechanism where it's sort of flapping around and flopping underneath the head of the actual monkey. And you get this very sort of rickety-rackety, very, like, less like a little tiny tin toy and more like some sort of giant robot. A little bit with all these independently moving parts that are messing around. And the same thing goes for stuff like the symbols, which have this very free-floating attachment to the arms, and the arms themselves, which have this very free-floating attachment to the body, which allows for a lot of sort of messing around with the gravity of the thing as it moves. And you can see that as well in the way that the body, you can see that rotation forwards as it moves along, the way that the little circle, fur circle there on its stomach kind of bobs along and goes up and down as the monkey's moving. And you get this very, like, really appealing, really well put together shambling animation that, if you think about it for a second, doesn't look anything like an actual tin toy. It looks much more organic, it looks much more weighty and kind of interesting and fluid, but it works. Like, this is not a criticism, this is an observation that they chose a particular aesthetic for the movement of this monkey that works really well. And now, framing. Because we cut from this shot of the monkey right here to this shot of the band sitting around talking, doing the shooting the shit, and the monkey is in focus, right? Like, the focus is on the monkey, we've got Powder sitting there in the background, and then as the band guy notices the monkey goes out of focus, and the focus shifts in on him. And again, excellent bit of 3D caricature work going on here. Like, again, it's hard to communicate how fucking difficult it is to put a real person to 3D animation and not have them look uncanny next to the actually designed 3D animation characters that you got beside them. Like, that's actually a really difficult goddamn thing to do. So good on Fortiche for managing that thing. And the character design of the band is also absolutely fantastic, I think, because again, that's also doing a lot of the heavy lifting of getting them to fit into this really kind of high concept fantasy setting that's going on here. So we have the band member, the band leader, the singer. I don't know if he's the band leader. He's the front man. He's the singer guy. He has this augmentation going on, which is he's like sort of body modification cyborg parts thing that's going on in the League of Legends universe. He's got one of those glowing, sort of sitting into him, where over his heart specifically, he's got this little speaker, almost as though like he uses his heartbeat to like play music with or to keep some kind of time or rhythm. We have the drummer who has this armband with, again, this green liquid inside it, which is Chemtech specifically. That's sort of, again, along with like the leather and the shoulder guard, almost as though he's some kind of fighter, places him into like the universe of the thing in a very believable way. Now, from a character design perspective, you can tell that these are caricatures of real people, like much more so than any of the other character designs I've seen for the show so far. Like, those look like characters that were designed to be in an animated show. These guys look like caricatures of real people, but they're caricatures that fit in. Like, they're caricatures that don't stand out catastrophically. By the way, notice something else about the house style of Studio Fortiche. If you didn't know any better. If you didn't know any better, my accent coming through there, you might not realize that this is 3D animation just based on looking at this. If I were to just print this out, I could probably convince people, no, this is just digital painting. Like, this is just a 2D picture that someone painted digitally, because all of the textures are painted, all of the, like, the light sources are carefully calibrated to work really well with this highly angular style that they got going on the faces. And once you see them move, you know that it's 3D animation, but if you just kind of pause it, you could convince yourself that what you're looking at is actually just, like, a 2D illustration, right? And smear frame. Oh, God, I love smear frames so much. So, when you have a quick, sudden movement like this, like where the drumstick goes from being lifted out above the frame to hitting the table in the frame, one way that you can communicate the speed of that motion and sort of help it read a little bit cleaner on the screen so that when it happens as quickly as this, you get the sense of that snap, that snap of the drumstick coming down like chuk, is to add smears, which is to say, in 2D animation terms, you would just draw like these lines, like sort of smear it out like that in the drawing. In 3D animation, you have to change the actual model of the thing, or you have to render a different thing on top of the actual model of the thing. So we've got motion blur that's being added. Again, motion blur, normally in a movie, when you see motion blur, that's a feature of the camera itself, right? That is, like, something is moving very fast and the camera only captures so many frames per second, so it's going to capture some blur and some stuff that's going on when it can't quite focus on the action. That's a function of a analog physical camera trying to capture reality with, like, a limited amount of resources. That's what motion blur is. But in 3D animation, motion blur doesn't really need to exist. Like, there's no physical reason why motion blur should exist. So anytime you see it in 3D animation, it's almost always, like, sometimes it can happen in the transfer between, there's other things that can make motion blur happen, but mostly it's added artificially. Like, this is motion blur that the artists at Fortiche decided to put on the drumstick, again to help that snapping motion read, again to help this, like, really quick tunk, this really quick tap properly read in the context of what you need it to do. And by the way, notice something else here. We're cutting on movement here, which is, again, this is a film thing. It's not really an animation thing specifically. This is just film. You can see here, the drummer has, like, he has brought the drumstick down. It has already hit the table by the point we are here, right? Surely. Like, he's already brought the drumstick all the way down, but as we cut, all of a sudden, we're almost going back in time a little bit, and we're, like, watching the same motion play out twice as the drumstick comes down and hits the table. And again, that's a thing that's done to really, again, help an audience track the motion of what's happening through a transition like that. And that's just a film thing. It's just a film. All movies kind of do this cut on movement thing where they try to communicate the motion of a character. It's there. Anyway, the film grain returns, which again is an artifact of physical film, not something that needs to exist in 3D spaces, which is used as a point of transition. It's used as a flash, essentially, to transition you from the drumstick hitting into boom. Now instead, we're looking at Powder's memories, and we're looking at her hugging this pink-haired girl, who is her sister Vi. And this hug is really, really important, because it's the basis from which the entire relationship is going to stem. Jinx and Vi are sisters, and they are just about the only people that they have in the world are each other. Like, something unspecified terrible happened to their parents. Not sure if Arcane is actually going to explore it very much, but something unspecified happened to them. They're orphans. They pretty much only have each other. Vi spends her entire life looking out for Powder, looking out for Jinx, trying to protect her, trying to keep her safe, and in so doing, like, she takes on a lot of stress. Like, she runs with a gang, she does crimes, she gets into fights, she does a lot to try and protect her little sister. It's hard on her, it's frustrating for her, and sometimes that frustration causes tensions in their relationship, as we shall see, but most of all, they love each other. And you can fucking see that right here, right? Like, this is almost a desperate hug, isn't it? Like the way that they just kind of clamp onto each other. Very tight, and like Vi petting her, and like look at Powder's expression, like Jinx's expression as she's leaning into Vi's shoulder. It's like this is a close relationship. This is two people who care about each other very, very deeply. You can tell, just from the character animation, the facial acting that's going on here is so fucking good. Because, like, look at how, like, the brows, like, they point upwards in this, like, sort of sad expression, but then they knit down and they create this tension in the face as Jinx, like, clings on harder and harder, and you can see that there's emotions inside her that want to come out, that she's sort of just holding back because she just wants to be in this moment, and you can tell that she's pouring worry and anxiety and tension into this hug because, like, she needs desperately the comfort that it's providing. You can tell just how, like, she's clinging to Vi. This is like, and Vi, for her part, we don't get to see her face yet because this is not her scene, really. This is much more about Jinx's relationship to Vi than the other way around. It's all about Jinx here. We get Vi's side of the relationship in other media that's been published, other trailers and stuff. But, like, you can see how deeply Jinx needs this comfort, right? Like, you can see how much it matters to her that she has a sister to hold on to here. And that's important. That's gonna matter because, oh boy, Arcane is not gonna be a fun time necessarily. It's not gonna be happy fun times in the whimsical fantasy universe of League of Legends. There's gonna be some emotional stuff, and it's gonna be a little rough. And I'm honestly kind of worried about it because again, Fortiche are really good at this, and when you have really good character animation, really pouring emotion and feeling into something like this kind of gesture of love, I am very weak to that, and it's gonna break my heart. So, god damn you, Fortiche, and also thank you. Anyway, we cut back again with like a little flash, little subtle flash on the screen to the guitarist playing the coolest fucking guitar I've ever. Like, it's lame. It's kind of lame and dumb and like edgelordy. Like, it's kind of dumb in a Fallout steampunky cosplay kind of way, but it's also simultaneously the coolest fucking guitar I've ever seen in my life, and I want one. Fortiche, if you have like a 3D printout of the thing, and you can like, if you can 3D print it and send it to me, it's very cool, and it's very lame, and I love it, and I want it. Anyway, back to the hug, where you can, again, like, just fucking look at what they're doing with the lips and the mouth here. Like, how much emotion do you have in those, like, where you can see she's almost trying to clench her lips together, but the lower lip is quivering with the emotion of all of this. And you can see Vi, like, wrapping her arm around her, like, literally holding her on top of the head, just holding her tight, trying to be there for her. And, like, that, look at that gesture with the mouth. Look at that, like, that. Like, you can see, like, she's, like, it's when you're bawling your eyes out and you get really, really snotty and you kind of try and suck it in. Like, that gesture right there with the nostrils deforming and the mouth kind of coming up and widening and, like, really, God, so much good feeling and emotion in there. Anyway, time for a montage. Time for a lot of montages. This entire music video is made up mostly of montages. We have this slow-mo shot of Powder, or Jinx, I keep forgetting to call her Jinx, and Vi just walking down this alleyway and clearly just kind of having a nice time on a sunny day, because Jinx is doing a little sort of walking down the alley dance, and Vi is looking at her, and you kind of get the sense that she's kind of amused by her little sister doing this thing. And then we have these two other kids in the background. They're also important characters. We don't know who they are, or what exactly their function is going to be in the show. We know that this kid over here, Captain Eyebrows over there on the left, is going to betray them, and he's going to be a secondary villain in the show. We don't know exactly how or why, but it has something to do with the main villain, who's probably going to tempt him with money or power or something along those lines. The kid on the right, we don't know. Like, I have a vague fear that he's probably going to die. Like, that's going to be how this kid over here betrays them, Captain Eyebrows, is this kid is going to get killed or captured, or like something bad is going to happen. I have a feeling that that's the way it's going to go, just because of the way that their character design, because we have... I really like the character design of the dude on the right here, because he looks so nice. Like, he just looks like such a nice dude. Like, just a pleasant fella overall. Whereas Captain Eyebrows over here, Like, not that he's designed like a Disney villain or anything, but you do get the sense of like less trustworthy. Like with like the sharp widow's peak. But for now, we are still in the happy times, where everybody's just hanging out, and they're dancing, and everyone's having a good time. And again, pay attention to the body language that's going on here, because they're dancing differently from each other, right? Like Jinx has a very different way of dancing than her friend over here with the goggles. Which again is something that is very well executed and pulled off. And here's another thing, a bit of subtle storytelling to tell you exactly who these people are. So here they're just hanging out in the market, just posing for the camera, I suppose. But what's this kid doing? Oh, there's a Krug in here, and he's just sitting there being a shithead to the animal in the cage because he can. Which again might tell you a little bit of something about how much empathy this guy has for, you know, other human beings who live in the world. Anyway, here's a funny little bit. We have Echo here, who's another major champion in League of Legends, who is also young at this point, and seems to know them, which confuses some timelines for me, but that's for another video. Where, like, Eyebrows is taunting the little Krug down here, right? And she's like looking at it, and it's like, oh, hey, that's a thing you're doing, and I'm a kid, and I don't understand why that might be sociopathic behavior. And then Echo's like, yoink! He grabs her leg, and she goes, ah! Because she thinks it's the Krug that's got her, which is a funny little prank that he plays on her. Which is just a lovely little character interaction moment. Like, that's the first sort of image you get of their relationship, that they have this very playful, sort of happy relationship with one another. Which is quite adorable. Like, kids at being kids, you know? And then another scene of, like, the good times of Jinx just hanging out, taking way too long. I hope that fish is dead. I presume it is. Taking way too long to eat this dead fish. With these interesting characters passing by the background. I hope there's something happens with them. But again, this is all just about establishing, here's these kids. They have this relationship. They're in it together. They're like friends. They are this group of people, like us against the world kind of vibes, right? Like these kids are together. They're surviving on the streets together. They're playing together. They're having fun together. We're establishing this status quo, these relationships, so that, like, later on, we can do terrible things to them and break everyone's hearts about them. But anyway, here's Jinx and Echo playing on a trampoline, I don't know, jumping on a bed, something. Whatever they're doing, I don't know. But pay attention again to their differences in body language. They don't jump the same way. Right? You see, when Echo jumps, like, his arms go up, and he's like trying to get higher and higher. Whereas Jinx jumping, she's a little bit less secure, right? Like, she's a little bit more careful about it. It's like her arms are down. She's trying to balance. There's a little bit more of a sense of a little bit more restraint from her, perhaps, than from Echo. Which, again, like, it's not enough to draw conclusions about who these characters are, but it's something that tells you they are different from one another. Like, they have a different relationship to their physicality. They have a different relationship to their bodies than one another. It's also the other thing, like, when Echo jumps, look how spread wide his legs are. When Jinx jumps, look how she kind of holds her legs together instead. And it's just, like, it's just good acting. Like, it's just good character animation. Like making them different visibly in a way that makes them feel natural. And then we get this shot, which is, I think, more of a metaphorical shot than an this is not a thing that actually happens. It's more of a metaphorical shot, and you'll see why a little bit later. But for now, just notice that there seems to be some movement going on in the throat, and then up to the mouth, and yeah, I think it's going to happen there in just a sec. Anyway, back to you can see this is the scene where they're eating fish at that stall, and right as the fishmonger turns his back, you can see Eyebrows here begins to dash off. Vi follows him. She pulls Jinx along with her. You can see, like, she literally just gets her sister going, and then our big guy, who seems to kind of feel bad about it, dashes away again, and they're doing a dine and dash, basically. And what a lovely character design on this guy, too. Like, that's good. Like, that's just a cool character, isn't it? Like you can see the stain, like, that's a very clever little thing. He has these scales, right? But then he also has these stains down the front that look like his scales, and they sort of integrate really nicely into the shape language of the whole character. It's just very good. And I love the detail that he has extra knives, like, just kind of stuck to his shoulder. Like, that's his knife board. That's just where he keeps them. Like, if he needs to cut up a fish, just grab a knife from my shoulder. where they sit as though someone's been trying to stab him, which is just a good detail. Like the gold tooth is another little lovely thing that just adds a lot of like sense of lived experience to the guy, and also the jiggling. Like this is a big character. There's lots of fat on him, right? And we need that fat, like that. We use that fat, rather. We don't really need it to do anything, but we use it to create secondary motion in the character. So, like when he completes a fast, sudden movement, you can see that the muscle and the fat on his body kind of jiggles around a little bit before settling into position, and it gives like a lot of lovely secondary motion to this character that gives him a lot of physical presence and makes him look really cool. And I do like the thing of like as they begin to dash, right? You can see how his ear right here begins to react, like he hears them, and then he looks over his shoulder, and then he's like, "Why, you kids, get back here! You haven't paid for your meal!" Which is lovely. Anyway, bug coming out of mouth. Bug coming out of mouth. These little things, these little green firefly critters, seem to be a metaphorical presence in the show. Like they seem to have some sort of symbolic meaning. I say as one of them like comes out of the mouth of another character. But also we learned from some supplementary material that these things are little robots. Like these are little mechanical things that fly around and illuminate things. So that's disturbing. But as disturbing as this is, like this, it's essentially like the thing is like it's emerging from a cocoon, right? Like this is a butterfly emerging from its cocoon is the visual language that's being told here. And there's a distressing sense of physicality to the lips here. Like as it emerges, you can see how its leg... Let me actually zoom in on that just to make it extra disturbing for you. That's all part of the services we provide here. TV Scan is just making things maximally disturbing for you, because you see how the leg pokes into the lip, and as it moves forward, you can see how the lip sort of snaps back, and then as it comes out, you can see how the whole mechanism of the jaw and the upper lip getting pushed back by the wings, and the whole thing, you can see how it kind of pulls at the skin, and it's distressing. It's very distressing, but it's also very well animated, so kudos to the animator who did that. I hate you. You're gonna be in my nightmares forever. Fuck you. Anyway, little flash frame, which sort of gives away the game of what this is a metaphor for, is that as this thing flies away, which you could sort of conceptualize as, for example, her sanity, or her last vestiges of humanity or reason, however you want to see it, we get this flash frame from child to adult Jinx, at which point she is a very different person. So what we have here is this moment of transformation, like the butterfly coming out of its husk also transitions into a transformation from child to adult, where you can see that all the bokeh effect, all these little glowing sort of warm lights in the backgrounds suddenly change into these green X's, which is all just very ominous. Like it also just sort of speaks volumes about how dark and fucked up things are going to get. And now we get a big look at an even bigger gang. They seem to have linked up with some other kids, and Vi here is giving them punching lessons. And here, just some lovely animation when it comes to the way that she punches, because she's a trained fighter. She's someone who knows what the hell she's doing. Punching is what she does best in the whole world. So pay attention to as she punches. Do you see that? That's a little bit of subtle squash and stretch, where the arm gets stretched out beyond what it's actually capable of doing. Zoop, and then it snaps back into shape as it comes down, which gives a little extra pop to that punch animation, right? And it looks silly if you stop it. But you get that snake-like snap of the fist coming forward. Duck and weave. Get up on your toes. Feint. And then you come in for, whoop, again. Look at the breaking of the character model. Like here, we're just completely shattering the character model. You can see, like, they basically just take her arm, break it into a million little pieces in order to get that forward momentum on the animation. As it pops up, again, like that stretch on the arm that's covered up very nicely with motion blur. That stretch on the arm that then pops back into shape. Same thing happens here. Little bit of an overstretch, and then we snap back into position. And this is all very classic animation technique. Like this is classic shit. Like Disney animation classic shit. This is squash and stretch being used to exactly the purpose that it's meant to do, applied to 3D animation in a very subtle way. Like it doesn't overstay its welcome. It's not obvious unless you pause and freeze frame your way through it, because if you just watch it in motion, what you get is these wonderfully smooth punches, right? Like, just look at the smoothness of that. Like, oh, that's good. This is some fantastically snappy animation. But anyway, Vi clearly here teaching these kids who look a little more rough around the edges. Like, we have our crew we already know about over here, right? Like, and they all, like, some nice primary colors. And, like, Jinx is blue, and, like, he's got a sort of colorful outfit. And they're just kind of hanging out. They're looking friendly. They're looking nice. Then we have the kids over here. It's like, oh, okay, these kids have killed people before. Someone has died, and they have been the ones who killed them. And this character over here is interesting because visually in this shot, they are put apart from the other characters. Like they're separated from the main group, but they're also visually very far separated from the kids over here. So who are they associated with? And who are they? Are you important, or are you just an incidental background character who happened to be there? Are you some secondary character who we're going to have to know about, or are you just there to fill out the space, I wonder? Extra character in the background. Guess we'll find out. And then you see, like, Echo and Jinx, like, they're paying attention to the lesson, right? Like, they're paying attention to what she's saying. So, cut to a moment later. And compare and contrast, like, what Jinx is about to do, you can see she's trying to mimic the movements of her sister. Like, very explicitly, you can see that she's trying to do the same stuff, but she ends up doing what kids often do when they're mimicking fast movements that they don't quite understand, which is she just ends up kind of flailing her limbs real fast, sort of expecting that it'll get the same effect. And what you see on the character animation, which is a lovely bit of brilliant trickery from the Fortiche animators, is when Jinx punches, no snapping. No squash and stretch, no arm extending longer than it's supposed to, no breaking of the character model. She's just making these big movements, but they don't have the same snap, they don't have the same force, because the animators literally chose not to apply the same animation techniques to them that would have given them that force and snap, which is just, that's good, that's really good, that's a great way to use the medium of animation to communicate a visual message to the audience so that we understand it. Like, because we understand that instinctually. You don't need me to explain that to you. You saw that. Like, you saw Vi punching here, right? Let's just play it out. You see her punching. You can see those punches have power. They have snap. They have force. They have speed. And then you see Jinx do it, and you can just tell that it's more awkward. You can just tell that it doesn't snap, that it doesn't have nearly the same amount of power behind it, right? You can tell, like, that this very long extended arm, like, this hits a lot harder, it's much more straight, it's much more disciplined, without me needing to explain to you, like, the lengths that they go to in order to make that happen. Like, the way that Vi, she steps in, and you can see she uses the twist of her hip, like, the whole hip below her twists, and sort of winds up her upper body like a spring, and then that spring, breaking the arm in the character model once again to get the real power to the blow. Kablooey! Absolute gut punch. Do not want to be on the receiving end of that, because like that, ooh, ouch. Like right above the dick too. Like the that would take me out. But then for Jinx, like here when she's really sort of trying to put her speed and power into it, they give her this motion smears, right? They give her the motion smears, they give her a little bit of the braking. But how do they present that punch? Like where you can see Vi, when she's punching, you can see how she's putting her whole body, like twisting into it, like stepping forward with her weight. You can see she's leaned forward. You can see that like this is a trained punch. Whereas with Jinx, pay attention to how she uses her weight, right? Like she's just kind of leaned forward in this sort of stiff awkwardness, and rather than like twisting her body to lean into the punch, she's just kind of throwing it from the shoulder like that. Look, more like a tap than a punch, really. And the places where they give her the snaps, right? You can see the motion blur coming on as she's sort of flailing her arm around in a random motion, as she's trying to kick out and sort of twisting around herself in this very awkward, unbalanced way. Where you can see, like, she comes up here, like, she's about to do the kick, but then she kind of jumps off the ground and she kind of has to hop, and you can see, look at that. Okay, gotta zoom in on that, That's a great detail. I love that. That's so cool. So look at that. Look at her knee. As she lands, you can see her knee buckles, right? You can see that, like, whoa, whoa. You can see how that, like, whoa, she kind of has to catch herself, and she almost loses her balance, and you just get that from that little wobble of the knee. As she, like, you can see she rotates, she kind of jumps accidentally and has to catch her balance, and that's sort of what's throwing her off, and she's kind of has to land back down and say, oh, it's good, oh, it's good, oh, it's good. Oh, I love this. This is so cool. Anyway, cut to her sort of looking at her own fist, and again, because we've been seeing her sort of try to practice punching, you get the sense that she's contemplating, like, will I ever get as strong as my sister? Like, will I ever be able to really take care of myself? But it's also a nice memory. You can also tell that this is like a happy memory for her. As she's looking at it, you can see the eyes kind of darting around, like as she's accessing memories in her visual. And as first she's looking at her hand, right? But then there's this subtle little gesture. Look what happens with the eyes. Let's go in close again on this one. Look what happens to the eyes as first... Stop doing that. First she's contemplating the hand, right? She's looking at the hand, but now look what happens here, there. That movement. That little, as the eyelids come down, that little movement, all of a sudden she's not looking at the hand anymore. She's looking past the hand. She's looking past the arm. She's staring into a memory. You can see her go from looking at the hand to being lost in a recollection. With that little gesture, and you can see how the eyebrows raise, and she kind of twists the head and that little smile comes on. You can see her going into a reverie. You can see the character disappear into their own thoughts. Visually, the animator is doing it for you. They're doing the acting, and it's so good. Anyway, Echo, even worse at fighting than Jinx. You can see he kind of tries to mimic Vi's stance, right? Where he's sort of trying to lean into the punch, but it's you can just tell that there's not that much power behind it as he stumbles over his own foot. Yoink. And badonk. And again, the memory, right? She remembers having fun with her friend, having a good time, having a happy day. And she remembers her sister looking over at her while she's giving that demonstration, and look at that smile. And she remembers that smile, she remembers that connection between the two. And again, you can see she's lost in a memory, she's staring at nothing. She remembers that happy connection between the two. And then, this lovely pillow fight. Which is just, it's just so cute. Look at that. Look, and you can tell that Vi is, pulling her punches here. And you can also tell that Vi is younger. That this is even further back. But you can tell that Vi isn't trying to hit her too hard. And that Jinx really doesn't have the strength to hit very hard. It's a play fight, but where the bigger sister is being careful of the little sister, which is just lovely. Anyway, secondary vocals from this guy. Some lovely facial animation when it comes to, getting the lip sync across. That's difficult to do in 3D animation because a mouth is a really fucking complicated thing. There are so many muscles, there's so many little micro gestures that a mouth can make when it's talking, when it's enunciating, that getting that right can actually be really freaking hard. So very good job there. I want that guitar so badly. As we're just hanging out with the crew in the bar, and I love the detail. You can see the guy here, whoever he is, bassist. You can see him drumming on his chest as he's keeping time with the music, right? And you can also the little bob of the head. You can see them feel the rhythm. You can see them be into the music. Again, this is some very subtle character animation, really, where they're into the music, but they're not rocking out. They're not throwing their heads around and doing a headbang. They're just vibing to it. You can see how they're into it, but they're not acting it out super hard, which I just think is lovely. And a little flourish and a drumstick spin from the drummer because he's a drummer, of course. It's valid. We stand. And then this lovely shot. So that's I can't remember what they're called, but that's a type of transportation that exists in the in the world of Arcane. I love this expression so much. With the little front teeth, biting his lower lip, he's such a kid. You just tell he's such a kid. It's he's everyone's shittiest little brother, right? It's that vibe, that little shithead. And I love the detail that they put flags on it because they're kids. Why wouldn't they? As they do that. So another character design detail. These are the cops. They're dressed like Darth Vader. Like, that's basically that's what's going on here. They have these helmets on, like these rebreather helmets, because the environment is poisonous and toxic, and it's terrible to be down there. And children live there in poverty and squalor, and have no help and no hope for the future, so they're naturally a little bit resentful of the authorities. Anyway, these cops look like Darth Vader. Like, they are dressed with these helmets that make them faceless, that make them alien, that make them scary, and also that give them faces like death. Like, their faces look a little bit like skulls. Just a little bit. Which makes them just look terrible. Like this is not someone you walk up to, like, looking for help. This is someone you run away from in a dark alley as the, like, clenched fist of the fascist dictatorship comes down upon you and your resistance group. Like, that's where these people are. Like, these are stormtroopers, basically. Anyway, cut to, you recognize these kids. These are the kids that Vi was teaching how to fight. Just kicking the absolute crap out of someone in an alley. I think it might be Eyebrows. It's hard to tell, really. Because they're just beating the absolute shit out of him. Presumably using some of the skills that Vi taught them. And here's Powder, Jinx, seeing it happen. Again, notice how her body is framed. We talked about in the bar scene how she looks like a very small person in a very big world that's too big for her. Look at this shot. Like, she's in the mouth of this alleyway. The camera could be pulled up close to her. It could be pulling in on her face. It could be focusing on her emotions, her acting, something like that. But what it's doing instead is it's pulling back, and what you get is this dimly lit shadow where she's standing out of the light, like she's standing in the shadow, looking small. Just looking small and helpless and powerless to do anything about what those two people are doing in that alley. And even here, as we close in on her, still the camera makes sure to frame her as just a very small thing in this world that's, like, clearly bigger than her. As we do get a little bit more of the acting where you can see, like, she's struggling with some feelings about this. You can see that, like, she's not really happy or comfortable about it, but you also get this sense of, like, resignation. It's like, what can I do? Like, this is what my life is like. And again, the cops, this is what they look like to her. Like, this is what the cops look like to this little kid who's living in squalor and poverty in this miserable hellhole of a city called Zaun. This is what they look like. And again, these are, like, fucking Warhammer 40k Chaos Marines, like, or actually just Space Marines. Like, Space Marines also look scary as shit. Like, they look like they come from the 40k universe. They look like they're stormtroopers. They look like something evil, right? Like, they look like the jackbooted thugs, like, that come to take your freedoms away. That's what they look like. And as they point at something or someone, there's this eerie red glow as though something is on fire. Even, like, the red glow just makes them even more scary and ominous with the shadows and the strategic lighting across their face to make sure that these, like, lenses kind of light up. Ugh, spooky. But as they point, we can see that Eyebrows and Jinx are taking off running, which, like, clearly sort of gives you the impression that, okay, they're running away from something. What are they running away from? Well, let me take a wild guess. As we transition into the next cut, which is, like, going back in time a little bit, and you can see here's the cops walking by. And do you have any doubt about how any of these characters feel about the cops? Like, do you have any doubt about how they feel about these authority figures? Like, Vi just looking like, it's like, touch my sister and I'll fucking kill you. This guy here having sort of a smug superiority look on her, and Jinx looking ready to kill something, frankly. Like, this is, like, a very tense kind of waiting for something to happen kind of mood. But, like, just from the posture, from the way that they're posed, from the way that they're conducting themselves, like, they're not challenging them or giving them any shit, but, like, they're like, we don't like having these people around. We don't like them being near us. We don't enjoy being in a situation where they are as well. As Jinx, yeah... does a thing that could get you shot in some places if you point at the cops like that, so, you know. Like I said, Arcane, not necessarily going to be a fun time as such. As we transition back into the bar with the musicians playing, and a little frame flash. Again, the little flash to the adult doing the same thing. which again tells you something like as she grows up into being an adult, this feeling, this fear, this anger, and this resent, it's gonna follow her into adulthood. And again, more gorgeous mouth animation. Like, like you can almost read his lips, can't you? Like, just the way that it, like, that. Like, look at that. Like, how the jaw comes up and sort of smooshes the lower lip against the upper lip. And you can see how the, like, the mouth widens out. It's like, it's like, I think it was like an M sound or something like a bilabial something or other. Just really good, really good. Anyway, they got caught by the cops here. And pushed up against the fence. Not particularly gently. But again, this scene is more about communication between the two sisters. Like, this is Jinx looking at her sister, who looks back at her and goes like, okay, well, we just have to deal with it. Like, we just have to suffer through this until we don't have to suffer it anymore. And here we come into, like, again, some absolutely excellent facial acting. Like I said, Vi is someone who has taken responsibility for Jinx their whole lives. Like, she's tried to protect her, tried to keep her safe, tried to do everything in her power to keep her sister from getting into any kind of trouble. And my reading here is that as they get caught by the cops here, Jinx is probably the one who got them into that trouble. And, like, there's a sense of, like, Vi being angry with her. And also, like, she's angry with her here, but look how her expression softens there. Like, well, like, it softens a little bit. You can, like, it's a complex emotion that's going on there. And here you can see Vi, like, why were you so careless? Why did you do that? Like, I'm trying to keep you safe. What the hell were you doing? And she's like, but I was just trying to, I didn't want to. And again, like, the facial animation, man! Look at this. Like, look at how much gesture that's in here. Like, this is an animated scene. Well, it's an animated, it's 3D animation. But this is an animated scene in the sense that the characters are very, like, they're emoting very quickly. They're emoting very strongly. And, like, there's a lot of feeling going on between them. And so, in order to make that sing, the same way that Vi had her punches, like when she was punching, the movement and motion gets exaggerated. Same thing happens here as we get into this very animated, this very articulated discussion. You can see how the facial animation gets really kind of... There's a lot going on. There's a lot of squashing. There's a lot of stretching. You can see the face grows longer. It grows shorter, depending on the gesture of the mouth. Like, especially here, you can see how Jinx's entire face, like, elongates into this, ooh, but I didn't... Like, how the mouth sort of leads this, like, squash and stretch of the whole face, which, again, is part of, like, when you're moving so fast, when you're trying to communicate so many things in such, like, a frantic manner, those little exaggerations help. They help sell it. They help sell the thing. And then, again, like I said, Fortiche, just brilliant direction and storyboarding in there, because we get this cross-cutting between the argument between the sisters as Vi is, like, berating Jinx for, like, getting them in trouble and not being careful enough, and you can see her frustrations boiling over more and more, cutting back to that happy little pillow fight in the olden days, when times were happier. Cutting back and forth between them, like... And it's brilliantly done. Like, it's just, like... You can see that in Jinx's head, like, this is... She is contrasting these two moments. Like, there is this moment of connection and play and fun and happiness and like, positive relationship between the two, which is now being shattered by this argument, like this all this frustration and anger, and a little bit of a clever doubling here. Doubling means you take a part of the model, you double it, and you put it on screen just for a brief second to sort of accentuate the power of emotion, to really make it pop. And watching that in full motion, like, you get a little bit more of that swoop, that quick movement sense going on. And there's also cut on motion, right? Like, as Vi steps forward here to give a big shout, that cuts into pretty much the same pose in the pillow fight to sort of, like, to carry the motion through into the next thing. But this also connects with a moment in the past where Vi went a little bit too far and hit Jinx a little bit too hard and knocked her on the floor, right? So what we get here is that this becomes a push, where in the present day, Vi also pushes Jinx to the floor a little bit too hard because she's angry and scared and frustrated, but we're seeing that anger and that fear and frustration through Jinx's eyes. And to Jinx, like, she's not really... Like, she doesn't know everything that's going on inside Vi. She doesn't understand necessarily fully why her sister is so fucking mad at her, why she's so stressed out. What she understands is the anger. What she understands is the rejection and the pain and the sting of that rejection. She sees that act of violence, right? Like that throwing a chair over, smack, like that. Because, like, this girl is overloaded with responsibilities that she doesn't know how to handle. And that slap is also really well animated. Again, doubling. You can see how here we have a very broken character model, like a very broken arm, doubling in to give that wham, like that full slap as, like, she smacks the chair over, which is accentuated with a little bit of 2D animation. Hey, finally some 2D animation. These 2D animated sort of impact shots as the chair gets, like, slapped away, boom, lending it that extra power and punch and pizzazz, as we've talked about with other punching animations before. More excellent facial animation, like, it's just good. Like, it's just good. Like, you can see the notes coming out of his face, like, you can see the music happening. It's, oh, excellent. And back to Jinx remembering, and you can see, like, the memory of that argument, which was presumably what she just walked out from. Like, this is probably, when she walks out into the bar, that's probably directly in the aftermath of that argument, and the things that happened there. And you can see that it's tearing her up inside, that her sister got so angry at her and yelled at her. And you can see that this guy notices that. And you can see that here comes the connection, right? So in the song, which I can't play for you, unfortunately, the verse that JID has, I think, is meant to act as essentially Jinx's inner monologue. Like, he has a very, very fast flow. He uses a lot of words. Eventually, the music, like, completely drops out under him. And just, like, he just goes off on, like, a rant. Like, I haven't even been able to parse out all the lyrics. I haven't looked them up. But, like, just a lot of words, a lot of feelings, a lot of things happening in his flow and in his verse that I feel like, in terms of the emotional storytelling of the short, is meant to communicate just the vast, overwhelming rush of feelings and thoughts inside Jinx's head that she's having a lot of trouble handling. So, as we head into his verse, that also signals an aesthetic shift in the video. Specifically, we transition from real spaces, as it were, into this theater of the mind, this highly surreal space that is much, much, much more explicitly a music video. Like, very much appropriating the aesthetics of modern music videos, like the sort of thing that you're used to seeing, well, back when MTV actually showed me, sort of thing you're used to seeing on YouTube when a music video comes out. It's much more in this sort of space where you see, like, playing with projectors, playing with light, and all of that, to show that we are in the mind of our poor girl. As you can see, she's just genuinely not having a very good time at all. And again, like, we get this moment of bonding between them, like, almost like a psychic connection, as he looks at her with those, like, glowing green eyes and gets taken over by, like, we get this laser light flashing over him that then also flashes over Jinx. And then we transition into, like, we get this skull face on him, which is, it's very cool. But where it's clearly, like, this stuff is projection lighting, right? Like, you can see that the dreads that he has cast shadows on his face where the light is being blocked over him. So these are clearly projection lights that are coming down on him. And, man, again, just the gestures of that. Like, look at the way they twist the lip over to the left to create that particular sort of, like, slightly twisted mouth gesture for whatever it is he's saying here. And then here again, like, this is just complete, like, this is complete music video posing, right? Except with the band members, we also have Jinx sitting there having a, like, less than particularly pleased expression on her face. And, like, by the way, I love her pose here because, like, you look at all the other band members, like, they're doing sort of classic "we are cool guys" sorts of poses, like the like sort of strong postures, like hands over the chest, like arms over the chest, like holding out. He's just doing like model posturing, right? Look at how Jinx is sitting. Like, look at that scrunched up tension that exists within her. Like, and compare that to the completely laid back, relaxed vibes of JID here. Like, I love the contrast there. I love the way that that's put together. But again, like, very obviously, this is mimicking projection lighting because they are on a soundstage right now. Like, they're in a studio shooting a music video on a stage, very obviously. And just, messing with the lighting on the face so good. That's very cool. And these highly surrealist, again, this imagery that suggests that JID is speaking out from Jinx's heart, basically. Like, that he's expressing what's or they're expressing what's inside her. I don't actually know JID's gender. And then we get this, like, this has very Gorillaz vibes to me, like the sheer white background and a couple of animated characters playing around on it, with, like, Jinx and Echo having a little bit of lighthearted fun still, that they still get to get. Which, again, to me sort of signals that at this moment, Jinx kind of thinks of Echo as her last friend in the world, something along those lines. Then we return again, like, this is something that was teased way back at the start of the music video, to this idea of, like, paper cutouts, inside of which the animation is playing. And here we get to talk about one of my favorite subjects, and the subject that I always bring up when it comes to animation, which is animation timings. So, say it with me, kids. This sequence with JID here is animated on 3s, actually. So, in animation, we talk about... Well, if you're a gamer, you can think about it as frame rates, right? Like, so something that runs at 60 frames per second is running a lot smoother than something that runs at 30 frames per second, and something that runs at 10 frames a second is, like, very, very sort of not very smooth at all. In animation, we work with sort of similar concepts, except here it's called various things, but it's called, you usually see it referred to as animating on 1s, 2s, and 3s, and 4s. Animating on 1s means on every single frame, something happens. And this is how the majority of the music video is animated. Like, on every single frame that we go back and forth, something moves, something happens, right? This is animating on 1s, because on every single frame of the animation is happening. If you're animating on 2s, what you do is you hold a frame every other frame, which means if you want to make enough drawings to cover 1 second of animation, right? If you're doing that on 1s, then you need 24 drawings. If you're doing it on 2s, you make 12 drawings, and you make each of those drawings last 2 frames, right? So you're animating every other frame of the piece. And depending on the visual aesthetic and the amount of budget that you have, sometimes maybe you animate on 3s, which is on every 3rd frame, or on 4ths, which are on every 4th frame. And the fewer frames you animate on, obviously, the less smooth the image becomes. And so on cheap productions that don't have a lot of budget back in the day, they used to animate, like, on somewhat choppier frame rates. Like, especially the very early history of anime and Japanese animation, they had to animate at some truly very low frame rates and do a lot with limited animation techniques. Because they just didn't have the budget to do anything more elaborate than that. When you watch a Disney movie, you're usually watching things on 1s and 2s. Like, it's usually 24 frames or 12 frames per second for most of the things that are happening. It sort of depends, varies. In 3D animation, of course, and I'm simplifying here, you can kind of just tell the computer to make more frames. Like, I have programmed these character movements. Dear computer, please render 60 frames of that movement per second, or render 24 frames of it, or render 30 frames. Like, you can kind of... Again, I'm oversimplifying. You can kind of just tell the computer to do that, but in 3D animation, oftentimes they appropriate the aesthetics of 2D animation in order to make a visual point, or in order to sell a particular kind of visual feeling to the animation that's being presented. This is something that on my channel I've talked about many times before, that 3D animation often does, will artificially limit the animation such that characters only move on 2s rather than moving on 1s, and do differences in the animation frame timing in order to create a different sense, a different visual aesthetic of fluidity than you get when you're working with everything moving on every single frame of the picture. The reason I bring that up is, have a look here. You can see here that the frame changes, but Dear JID here doesn't do nothing. Boom, now he does something. Boom, now he does something. Boom, now he does something. Boom. So he's animated on 2s here, while everything else in the frame, all of the background effects, all of the lighting, all of the most of the nonsense is animated on 2s as well. You can see, for example, see that right here, this smear in the background. This is animated on 2s as well, because that also changes every other frame, but it changes at a different timing than JID's motion, right? So you can see that there's this thing, even though he's not moving on every frame, there's always something moving on every frame. And what that does is it creates this aesthetic. Like, and it's very brief, but like you can kind of see that the aesthetic of movement that's there in these frames that are captured that are running on 2s instead, it has like a different vibe, it has a different animated feel than the very, very smooth 3D animation that's otherwise dominating the music video. It's just a little thing. Like it's just we're just returning to the idea of paper cutouts. So it's almost like these frames of animation have been drawn on these post-it notes and then cut up and sort of collaged together, which is very cool. It's just a cool little visual, I think, that was kind of teased at the start of the show. But it also sort of, like my reading of it is that it sort of ties together with this idea of being kind of fractured, falling apart a little bit. Which is also something that comes through with all the scribbles that constantly appear over the top of the character. Like, it all gives this sense of a character who's going through so many things all at once. Like, you have this skeleton that comes up over JID, and flashes over their face. Like, there's this imagery of death. Often, like, you have this X over their mouth. All of which, like sort of contributes to this sense of, like, something wild is happening here. Being silenced, being speechless, or something along those lines, which is ironic because JID is many things, but absolutely not speechless in this video. And we get this little lovely color smearing on the eyes as we go into, again, this is a character acting as though they're losing their mind a little bit, like wide-eyed, holding on to their head. And look at the little curl on the lip there. Like, look how that line appears next to the nose as the lip curls up in that snarl. Very cool. And then here we have, like, they're just doing dance moves, right? But the scribbles in the background are sort of accentuating the thing that JID is doing anyway, which is, like, very well put together. It sort of gives them that electric energy. And now here again, like, just completely music video land. Like, it's very deliberate artifice. Like, you can tell that this is an artificial technological space rather than anything that's supposed to be understood as real. Which again, like, it takes you to it, and it's a clever thing to do, really. Like, to use, like, a space of technology, a space of sort of music video artifice to showcase what it's like to be inside the mind of Jinx. Like, to take us to a different place that is, like, clearly, it would be fictional from the perspective of anyone who lives in the Arcane world. This would be, like, a psychedelic space. Whereas, as modern viewers, we understand it as more of a mediated real space, which is, like, an interesting thing to do. And again, some lovely character animation on JID here. Like, we have this screen tearing going on as though we're looking at this sort of, like, a broken VHS tape or something. But then, like, that little grab on the face, like, again, it's all about these feelings. And then we go back here again to an aesthetic of being animated on twos, which again contributes to, like, that slightly choppier, really cool feeling of it all. And you can see it also here with JID, like, as they're moving and they're dancing, the background details are also animated on twos, following them through the moves that they're doing. And again, it's like, oh, the vibe of it is just very cool. As we pan out for a second here, and Jinx adult gives a little snap, and Fishbones, which is her rocket launcher, launches the Super Mega Death Rocket, which is very big and explodes real hard. Anyway, the smoke and all the explosion effects, like all these like little lighting lines and stuff that come out, that's all hand animated, baby. That is all 2D animation. And as you can see here, this one, the smoke is actually animated on 3s, because I can go 2 frames back and forth without anything changing with the smoke. Cool. Excellent. Some backlighting, again, highly artificial space, and my god, the animator had their hands full. Like, I'm sure there's some physics simulation in there somewhere with the hair, but, like, getting all of those things to flop around and fall in a way that feels natural and doesn't interfere too much with, like, the visibility of the face and the composition, and don't, like, obviously clip through each other. I'm sure they do, but, like, not obviously. That's, like, boy, that's a bunch of hard work. Like, even if you have a physics simulation for it, that stuff needs to be cleaned up. An adult Jinx once again. And yet, with all that flashing over top, like, again, like, I see the light projection as symbolic of the internal chaos. Like, the outside is stoic, but the inside is completely chaotic. And then there's this cool-ass effect where, like, a skeleton gets sapped into JID's body. Like, just briefly, we see the femur and the thigh bone, and, like, just a skeleton sort of being projected onto them very briefly as we head into, like, this next cut, where they're going back and forth. And this is I think this is the point where the music also begins to cut out, because they just go off on such, like, a run of very, very fast words. And that's also something that's really difficult to do, because here, like, JID is going off. Like, they're going real fast with their flow. Like, they're going really, really fast with the word, they're going really fast with their diction, and their movements correspondingly have to match the frantic energy of that talking. But the difficult thing is, when you're having a character move very, very quickly in very, very small movements, especially on screen, you run the risk that you end up making it look like they're just sped up. Like it's just a character who's moving normally, but you sped it up, like old-timey film footage of like an ancient Buster Keaton movie or whatever. You run into that problem. Like that's an aesthetic line that can be kind of hard to walk, where the character needs to look like they're moving frantically and fast, but they shouldn't look mechanical like the way that you would if it was a very slow, deliberate movement that was being mediated by simply speeding up the footage. So there have to be a lot of little, like if you look at their hands, for example, take a look at this. Here's a subtle little thing. There we go. As they wiggle their fingers here, do you see that? Do you see like how that finger kind of stays there as the other one starts moving down? Then it follows, and then as it falls down, like this little bit of follow through and secondary motion as it like settles, as they wiggle, as they sort of like they're not moving like quite as perfectly or smoothly as they would if the footage was sped up. And remembering to add in all those little secondary motions, all those little details that give the character physicality, that sells the franticness of their motion. Again, like it's stuff that animators get trained to do, but it's craft, it's discipline. It's something that you have to know how to make it look proper. You have to know how to make it look frantic and organic and real in a way that works. This is something we talked about during the argument as well, like the small ways that you can exaggerate motion in the character to sell this sort of very fast-paced sense of franticness that, you know, if you were doing much more slow, deliberate movement, might be a little bit too much. It might not really work. But here it does. Anyway, Jinx is not having a good time. Like, pulling at her shirt, and like, you can kind of see, like, again, like the light represents that uncontrollable chaos that's taking her over. As you can see, like, she's just kind of receding, crying inside of herself, but all of these feelings, all of these emotions, all of this fear, all of this worry, all of this loneliness, like leading to what's really just a mental breakdown on screen, as she's hitting herself in the head, trying to control the thoughts or maybe make them go away, which is like, whoo boy. Like, yeah, she's not doing well. And we get this shot with yet another flash to adult Jinx, and we get a change in mood here. Like, it's a Jokerification moment, right? Where she goes from, like, looking through this tiny little slit out into the world with not got a very happy expression on her face, to an expression of confidence and sort of predatory intent and danger. And then we get the little tiny flash of pink. And the pink eyes on Jinx are a visual signifier of something that's going to happen to her during Arcane that's going to turn her, like, that's going to snap her. Like, she's going to be wound up and wound up and wound up like that little mechanical monkey. And then something's going to snap, and she's going to have pink eyes, and she's not going to be quite the person that she once was. And it's going to be bad news for everyone else, as we get one of the final shots in the music video, which is Jinx here surrounded by that police. And you can tell that, like, in her mind, they are the source of a lot of this, a lot of all of this. And this is just, again, notice how they're using the light projections, right? We have these sort of chromatic shadows falling off of Jinx, and they are expressing, again, like the chaos that's inside is being expressed through them, because they're constantly flickering into these wild scribbles and this mania, this manic feeling inside of her head that she just can't control. She can't make it stop. And you see here, like, this idea of, like, faces projected onto faces, like a character that's fracturing, it's becoming, like, that's becoming unbound from themselves. Like, Kit Jinx screaming, pounding the walls, trying to cope with everything that's going on inside her, against the projected image of who she's going to become as an adult. And here you get the point of it, right? as she's standing alone in the amidst all of these terrifying, like, police ghouls, like these terrifying Darth Vader creatures, basically. Her adult self appears behind her as a sort of guardian angel, and you get it. Like, you get it that her adult self is essentially a sort of shield or a protection that she's had to put up in order to deal with the constant stress of being surrounded by, you know, all of the Darth Vaders. Like, you kind of get it. Like that this is the person she became in order to protect herself, in order to cope with what the world is around her. And the person that she became very capable of doing that. In fact, perhaps a little bit too capable. And she's repeating the gesture, like the point and shoot gesture that she did at the police officer earlier. She's repeating it here. And then we get this clever little fade as the police officer falls past. We cut back to the little girl, because that's who she is on the inside, right? Like, that's what's in there. And back to the bar, out of the mind space, back into the real and the present. As music has done its job of expressing feelings, everything winds down, and the monkey goes off the edge. You see, because it's a visual, it goes off the edge, right? It goes over the edge. It's a visual metaphor for losing control and falling apart as a human being. Anyway, it's a very good music video. Fortiche are very, very fucking good at what they do. And even if the show isn't actually good, which I really feel like it's gonna be, even if the show isn't actually good, I'm gonna love it for the simple reason that it's gonna have this animation. Like, these people are gonna be animating it who are this good at doing animation things, and I'm just gonna be happy the whole time because there's gonna be good animation on screen. Maybe that's more important to me than it is to other people, but, you know. Anyway, was that over an hour? It's probably over an hour. I can't actually tell because I had to cut this up into multiple recordings, but yeah, we talked about that for a long time. If you enjoyed it, like, comment, maybe subscribe. There's definitely gonna be more animation breakdowns like this one. I trust you, believe me. It's gonna happen. Also, I have a Twitch channel that I very rarely use, but I'm gonna use it for the premiere of Arcane on the 6th of November, which is allowed to be co-streamed only on Twitch.com. I do it here on YouTube, but I'm not allowed. Where I'll just stream it live, and I'll react to it as it goes, and we'll hang out with chat, and we'll have fun. And if you want to watch it with someone who's gonna freak out and gush over animation moments and stuff like that, you head over there. This is a link in the description. And that'll be happening then. I probably won't use my Twitch channel for much other than that, so, you know, you don't have to follow it, but just show up for that then. I can't put a VOD. There's not going to be any video on demand. It's going to be a one-time thing only, so if you want to hear my reactions, you kind of have to be there, because I'm not allowed to put the video on demand up on the internet because of licensing reasons. Anyway, like, comments, have I said that? Like, comment, subscribe. That's the thing. I have a Patreon, a merchandise store, and a tip jar. That's stuff that helps me pay my rent, helps me pay food and things so that I can spend my time doing insane things like this for a job somehow. So if you want to help me with any of that, you can use any of those options, and I'd be very grateful for the help, but you absolutely do not have to. I'm just happy that you've watched the video this far. Thank you very much for watching. Remember to wear a mask and wash your hands. Yes, I know, but even still. And get the flu shot. It's a good idea. It's a vaccine that's hopefully available to you. It'll prevent you from getting the flu, which, hey, that's nice. It'll also prevent you from giving other people the flu, which is even more important when it's already like pandemic times. So do that. My fervent recommendation. And try to act with solidarity towards those who are worse off than yourself.